Welcome everyone to ISKCON of Silicon Valley. We're part of an international organization founded by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who you'll see here sitting upon this ornate seat, which is called a Vyasasana. Asana means a seat, and Vyasadeva is known as the editor of the Vedas, the primary source of knowledge and information for following the process we call devotional service, bhakti yoga or Krishna consciousness. And he came to America on the order of his spiritual master, who desired to see that the teachings of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam be made available to everyone in the world. At the time when he came, as in many previous eras, there was a way in which people in India felt that there was exclusivity in the teachings, that is, only a certain class could take them up. However, that's not in the teachings themselves. They're meant to be available to everyone because it's a universal process called Sanatana Dharma, which means it relates to the living entity, not to the body. The living entity is distinguished in the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, by Krishna, who says that a wise person views all living entities equal in one sense because he or she sees beyond the external covering of the body, whether one be human or animal, and notices that what's animating the body is a divine spark of the Supreme, and it's personal, it's not impersonal either, as God is also personal. And those who take up the process of Krishna consciousness, of course in this age, the main process was given by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, an avatar of Krishna who appeared 500 years ago, was to repeat the names of God, considering that God's name and God himself are the same. And by repeating the names of God, one would have divine contact with God directly. And when groups of people would come together and sing the names of God together, there would be a compounding effect. And those who do take up the process, because the touch of the divine name of God is so powerful, whatever condition one's in is purified and one becomes uplifted. Krishna talks about this in the Bhagavad Gita, where he says, Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatitaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. In any condition of life, if one takes up divine service to the Supreme, then one gradually will rise above the impurities of the material world, including identification with the material body. And Srila Prabhupada brought that message and he represented it. That is, when he wrote his literatures, he would mention that he was representing a tradition and that there was an authoritative source to what he was saying, based on the fact that the Vedas reveal themselves. There has to be a source of knowledge that we consider absolute in any knowledge system, otherwise you get infinite regress. And we present the Vedas as that, and he presented the Vedas as that ultimate source of knowledge. And so his outreach to the West, which of course includes a harrowing story, or the very typical story of the hero who goes off on a hero's journey with nothing and ends up being very successful and coming home to great acclaim. That story is fairly well known by many who have come in contact with Krishna consciousness and have studied the life story of Srila Prabhupada, as we call him. And it's a title, by the way, which Srila means something beautiful, and Prabhupada means the one who's able to bring more teachers into the line of Krishna consciousness. Some people teach independently, but those who are able to make teachers who can teach others, they're called Prabhupada. And when he came to America, he established centers. Of course, it's not so easy to establish a center, especially when you start with nothing, but it happened in New York, and then it came to San Francisco. Then there were various other places, New Mexico of all places, then Montreal. And then, of course, it went across the ocean. And George Harrison, the Beatles got involved. There was a hit record involved, chanting Hare Krishna. That caught on in a big way, both in Europe and in America. And one thing after another, as they say, one thing leads to another. There was an international movement. Before he left, he came to America in 1965, and he left the world in 1977 from a beautiful temple in Vrindavan that he had established. And he had, by that time, established at least 108 temples around the world and published around 80 books that had been distributed in the millions, multi-millions, all around the world. So his hero's journey was complete, of course, when he established this movement in America and then went back to India, and many greeted him there as a kind of hero who had brought the culture, the teachings of India, and introduced it in various places around the world, not the least of which were in Asia, like Japan, and all over Europe, Russia, which was not easy, and that's a story unto itself when he was able to somehow or other finagle a visa and go meet a professor there. But within that time, he met some seekers, or at least one, who wanted to know about Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada spent the couple of days that he had there on his visa speaking to that person, who then became very dedicated to spreading Krishna consciousness in Russia. Every area where there is an enclave of Krishna consciousness, there is a story, or many stories, as there are here at our center. And I won't start down that path right now. But I just wanted to give a brief introduction. Today is a very special day because in India there's a large celebration going on, and we've advertised about this around Silicon Valley. In India today is the Ram Mandir Pran Pratishtha, where a temple of Lord Ramachandra is being established in a place where it had been previously and then it wasn't, and I won't go into all the details, but now there's a temple there. That's the main thing. And this is of no small significance to those especially who live in India and who love Ramachandra. In previous decades, I do remember when the story of the Ramayan would come on the television in India, you could count on the fact that nothing would run, like there were no trains running or no people out and about, which is a miracle in India, because that's what India is, people and animals out and about everywhere. So that came from the broadcast of the Ramayan, and everyone being glued to their television set them as much as some others may be glued to watching the finals in a cricket match or something like that. But this is unusual because a whole country whose heart is taken by the prospect of hearing the story yet again of Ramachandra. So that's what the flavor of today is, that we're in concert with those all around the world who are, many of our members, by the way, have run off to Ayodhya suddenly in the middle of the night. I guess they found a ticket and they're there for the celebration and the opening of this new temple. Mandir means a temple, and the installation of the deity of Ramachandra. So, first of all, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the quintessential teachings of devotional service, there's a listing of the various appearances of God in the world, according to the great teacher Shukadeva Goswami. There was an assembly at Naimisharanya, backing up even one more step, in which many sages attended to hear the science of devotional service. And during that, the spokesperson for all the sages asked the main speaker, who had been appointed by consent of all of the assembled sages, and that person, the speaker, was named Sutta Goswami. Then there was also a person designated to ask questions on behalf of the sages. So it's quite an organized assembly. And one of the questions that Shaunaka Rishi, who is the appointed elderly person with great spiritual stature, was to ask was, could you tell us about the various appearances of the Supreme in this world? Of course, the Vedas and the Srimad Bhagavatam and the culture itself acknowledge that God appears in many places. The list is not exhaustive. In fact, as mentioned in the Sri Brahma Samhita, a prayer that was offered by Brahma, said to be the first created being in the universe, goes, Ramadi Murtishu Kala Niyamena Tishtan Nanavataram Karod Bhuvaneshu Kintu Krishna Swayam Sambhavavat Paramat Pumanyo Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. And also, Deeparchareva Hita Shantanamadyupeta Dipayate Virvita Hetu Samana Dharma. Yes Tadrageva Hicha Vishnu Chaya Vipati Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Both of these verses, and there are thousands more, indicate that God appears in order to deliver the souls of this world. This world is considered to be a world of darkness, and bring them back to the world of light, which is in the presence of the Supreme. And that he's strenuously offering himself again and again in many different forms and ways around the world. So the Vedic culture readily accepts that there are many ways in which God either sends messengers in various cultures around the world, or himself appears to avail himself to people so that they can come back home, back to the spiritual world. And when there is the appearance of someone that comes from a higher spiritual stature as a representative of God, or when God himself comes, this is called avatar. An avatar literally means in Sanskrit one who crosses down from a higher position to a lower position, with the idea that the avatar would help those in the lower position to rise, to come up to a higher position. And this actually is the preoccupation of God, to help those who have fallen into the mire of the material world to come out of it. Speaking of mire, do we have enough air in here? Do you have something on your Apple Watch which could verify that? I know it tells how much oxygen you have in your blood, but I don't know if it tells how much in the room. We should ask for that next iteration. It does? Okay, not only do we need more air, we need more space. So everyone please move up by 7.2 inches. You can bring your... Actually, if you leave your seat, we'll put another... Do you have more seats you can put here? Or we're fresh out? Everyone just move up. We fit as many as 5,000 people in here. Actually 10,000, but don't tell anybody. Broadcasting live. Okay, so... And also, what about the air? You're bringing some in? No gaps. We're expecting at least a few hundred more people. Plus it may rain, so... Hey, I feel air coming in. Much better, right? So, where was I? Avatars. When God comes personally to the world, he does so for the benefit of everyone. One of the ideas of the Srimad Bhagavatam is that we're preoccupied with the material world, which even Plato described as a reflection. Cave dwellers who are watching their own shadows upon a wall. Outside is the real world of light. And we have the experience that everything in this world diminishes. We have experience that we die. In fact, Patanjali Muni in his treatise called the Yoga Sutras says that the deepest impression that every living being has in this world is that of death. We suppress it. Many psychologists have opined in the same way that most of the diversions that we find ourselves engaged in this world are, according to them, a way of forgetting the fact that we, at one point, have to leave this present body and move on somewhere else, even after having assumed many roles that seem to be permanent. We'll have to give them up at a certain point, even change bodies, maybe even change species as a soul. And the avatar comes to give us an alternative, to show us what the world of light looks like, of what real beauty is. Its beauty is unlimited variety and in transcendence. That is, there are some who say that because the material world is temporary, therefore and because there's variety in the material world, they think spiritual realization means something impersonal. The opposite of variety is no variety, which means homogeneous oneness. And this is a fallacy. Actually, the real case is, according to the Bhagavad Gita, that this world is a reflection of the spiritual world. And therefore, not therefore, but also, we need variety, we need beauty to survive. The beauty of this world and the variety of this world, although we strain to take it all in, we end up disappointed because it moves on. We'd like it to stay. We'd like it to be enhanced on a regular basis, but it goes the opposite direction. And therefore, some being disappointed with variety because of the temporality of the world then come to an idea of liberation, emancipation, which includes giving up all sense of personhood. What to speak of the variety of the world and relationship, it never existed, it was only an illusion. This is not the version of the Bhagavad Gita in which Krishna tells Arjuna, as he's consoling him on the battlefield of Kurukshetra before the war begins, na tvevaham chatunasam na tvam nemi janadipaha, that all of the combatants you see gathered here today, they're all individuals. They've been individuals in the past, they are now, and they will be in the future, even after they die. We never lose our individuality. What's to speak of the fact that, we can understand that if we're individuals and we're emanations from the Supreme must also have a sense, or must be a person, because we're not more than our Creator. So, to that end, there's a way in which the various avatars of the Supreme, who, as I described before, come again and again to this world. There is a way in which, as they unveil themselves in this world and show their what we call lila, or pastimes, then we can become attracted to them. And this means becoming attracted to reality. And when we do that, as Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita, janma karma cha me divyam evam yo veti tattvata tyakvadeham punarjanma naiti mam eti so Arjuna. That is, he said, if you learn the truth of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and understand that he's in a different category from everyone else in this world, doesn't have a material body, he's not forced to take birth as we are, and if you can come to an understanding of that, what's called tattva, or science, or truth, understanding the various categories of energy, that some are superior and some are inferior, and by engagement in the superior energy in what's called devotional service, or bhakti yoga, service to God in a variety of ways, then you can rise above the temporary varieties of this material world and the relationships here, which are temporary in themselves. And the Srimad Bhagavatam goes on to list, or I should say, Sutta Goswami, who has been asked this question to name the various avatars that have appeared in the world, goes about listing many of the avatars. And of course, those who have read the Srimad Bhagavatam know that there are nested stories within the Bhagavatam. So as Sutta Goswami begins talking about the advent of God in this world, and the many times in which he appears, and the many forms in which he appears, then it crosses over, the story that is, crosses over into other storytellers telling about the appearance of the Lord. And one of the main ones is Shukadeva Goswami, who is a great transcendentalist himself. I won't go into the story of Shukadeva right now, although I'd like to. And he tells about scheduled incarnations. That is, in his work to give the opportunity to all of us in this world to have an alternative to the temporary nature of this world, the temporary forms, temporary relationships, he comes in order to present himself and his eternal associates so that we can become enraptured in the stories about them, in the imagery, the beauty of the pastimes, the songs that emanate from those eternal personalities. And we can, even as we're in this world, enter into the spiritual realm, even as we're living within these material bodies. As some of the great teachers of bhakti have said, Iha yasya harer dasya karmana manasa gira nikila apyavastastu jivan muktas uchite, which means iha in Sanskrit means here, even in this body. One can have a dual citizenship. That is, those who are absorbed in the Supreme by hearing about God, about Kṛṣṇa, about Rama, and who are engaged in devotional service both internally, that is thinking about God and ways to serve, and externally in manual labor. Manually means with your own hands, doing service to the Supreme. Such persons, although living apparently in a temporary material body, undergo a transformation through which internally they're always thinking about God. They develop a relationship with God from within their own hearts. And their bodies are no longer considered material at that point, based on the principle of an iron rod placed in fire, which, after being left there long enough, turns into fire, becomes red hot. So Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita, Brahmarpanam brahmahavir brahmagnau brahmanohutam tenaiva brahmagantavyam brahmakarma samadhina. That when you engage anything in the service of Krishna or the Supreme, then it also transforms, just like the iron becomes fire. So similarly, everything that we have, including our own minds and bodies, become spiritualized by connection with the Supreme. My main point that I'm leading to is that you have to have something to meditate on. You can't meditate on nothing. And that leads to an unfortunate loop that brings one back into the idea of trying to enjoy the material world. This is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in which some of the demigods who are greeting Krishna before he appears in the world, and he's still in the womb, say, Yene Raminaksha Vamuktamaninas Tvayasta Bhavad Avashudha Pudeya Arure Krishnena Paramparam Tata Patantyato Nadrita Yushmanan Graya. And that is, unless you have a very clear idea who God is, his form, his beauty, his pastimes, as we say, and all his qualities, and you also have an attraction there, then it's inevitable that you'll be reabsorbed in the material world, one way or the other. And it doesn't matter what kind of liberation you think you've attained, unless it includes a personal connection with the Supreme Personality, then you won't be able to sustain it. All that to say that this is one of the main reasons that Krishna, God, comes to the world, to say, here I am. And when he does come, then there are what we call pastimes of the Lord, his Leela, to discuss. So one of the most famous of the appearances of Krishna in this world is the appearance of Ramachandra. Ramachandra is a form of Krishna who comes to the world in a very particular mood. First of all, he is in a royal setting, a little different from Krishna, who ends up in a village with cows and bare feet and a flute. Ramachandra, as far as I know, doesn't play a flute. He's born in a royal family, the family of Dasarath. And a heart-rending story emerges from the Leela of Ramachandra in this world. His father, Ramachandra's father, Dasarath, was a great king and warrior, and well established in this world as the protector of his kingdom, Ayodhya, loved by all of its residents. And he was endowed with every asset one could imagine, except for one. Didn't have a son. And that doesn't work well for kings, for a lot of other people too. They can't imagine living without having offspring and developing a family, or in king's case, a dynasty. And he prayed for offspring and was blessed by a sage to have offspring. And besides just one son, there were four who appeared in this world as divine manifestations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, himself as Ramachandra. And in the science of the Bhagavatam, God has unlimited energies, parasya shaktir vividai vashuyate. So those energies are personalized, and he expands himself into various forms. So those would be his brothers, Bharat, Shatrughna, and Lakshman. So in their growing up in the kingdom of Dasarath, the people of the kingdom became joyful because they noticed that now we have a successor. There's Prince Ram being the eldest, and the one who would naturally succeed his father. And these were effulgent children. Imagine how they looked, or how does God look when he's a little baby. Most babies are attractive, I have to say that. Kuchi kuchi ku. But when God becomes a baby, forget about it. Everyone goes nuts. And when he's a little warrior child, and he and his brothers, Ramachandra, in the midst of Ayodhya, shone as they grew up as these unlimitedly attractive children who then excelled in every way in academics, and then as they were trained in the martial arts, they were mind-bogglingly expert in all ways. And there was a natural feeling of peace in the kingdom because everybody knew that Ramachandra would take over the kingdom. So during that time, when they were teenagers, a sage named Vishvamrita came to visit the king of Ayodhya, Dasarath. And when a sage comes into the midst of a kingdom, there's a way in which there's royal welcoming. And Dasarath welcomed the sage Vishvamrita, who's known to be a very powerful sage. And after all the usual pleasantries, he offered him whatever he'd like, which is quite, usually quite reasonable for a king. It's like, whatever you want, I can give you unlimited wealth. Well, there was one thing that Vishvamrita wanted, and he wanted a little donation. I just need your son. Somebody comes to your house, it's like, yeah, how can we help you? It's like, you just want your son. How would you feel? Dasarath equivocated. He said, well, but everything but that. And the sages oftentimes, they don't like to be refused. And the sage he was rankled by that idea that, I can give you anything else. In fact, I'll bring all my armies. Because the reason Vishvamrita had asked for his son, the inner reason was he had an idea that he was a manifestation of the Supreme. He also had a problem, because wherever in the forest that he was performing his rituals, according to the Vedas, it was his duty to do, there was a person who was ruining those rituals by flying overhead and dropping foul substances, making loud noises, and so forth. Sounds familiar. So he needed a warrior to come and protect. Of course, he was powerful enough to do it himself as the sage that he was, but in the system of varnashrama, there was a way in which everyone stayed in their lane, and brahmanas did not get involved in martial affairs. So he needed these two boys, or at least he needed Ramachandra, and he asked for him. So the guru of the king, his name was Vaisesika, had said that on a sidebar, he called the king over before there was a disaster, that is Vishvamrita just walking out and saying, all right then, good luck, and then the whole kingdom would fall apart. There was a sidebar with Vaisesika, who called his client to the side, and he said, don't do this. Just give him what he wants. He said, I'll tell you inside secret, your son's not ordinary. See, it's hard for the father, even in Krishna's Leela, the parents of God, they don't quite get it. They just love him. And they don't see, oh, there's God. If they did, there wouldn't be a relationship like that. They'd be, So he said, don't refuse the sage. It's all for the good. It's all in the Leela. This is unfolding Leela. Just take it like that. For one reason or another, Dasarath accepted it, and he blessed that his son, and not only would Ram go, but Lakshman. They were inseparable. They always were together in growing up and in learning. And they went off. They defeated the demon. They came back. And everything was on course for Ram to take over the kingdom. In fact, minus thousands of details. There was a time at which Dasarath had decided that he should expedite anointing Ram as the king. And the people knew about it, and they had started to decorate the city. And they were planning, as Hanspriya does for these festivals, decorations, and there will be prasadam, right? Prasadam and music and everything. All the stages set up for the anointing of Ram. And the night before, there was some intrigue. One of the wives of Dasarath, named Kaikeyi, who was also in a celebratory mood, was dissuaded from her support for Ram being anointed. Her son was named Bharata. Nonetheless, she considered Ram to be her own. It was such a tight-knit family. No usual politics at that time of who gets to take the throne, why you, why not my son, and so forth. But she had a maidservant who worked for her for many years, whose name was Mantra. And Mantra had this sense that if Ram becomes the king, then Kaikeyi would be neglected. And that meant that Mantra would be neglected. And it was one of those things where people have a little corner office somewhere, and they're just getting by, and it's just the salary they like, but not too much, not too little, but they're surviving. And then there's a sense that, oh, there's going to be a shakeup, and then I might lose everything. She was insecure. She became envious. So she brought all that envy to Kaikeyi and very expertly injected that sense of envy into her ear. And Kaikeyi flipped. That is, her mood flipped, and she became afraid of Ram being installed. And there's a way in which, in the story of the Ramayan, Dasarath owed Kaikeyi a couple of boons, because in younger years, she had saved him on the battlefield from being slain. And he said, I will give you boons. And you can take them now or later. She said later. So as fate would have it, Kaikeyi reminded her, Mantra reminded Kaikeyi that there are these boons, and here's how you should use them. Trade them in now, and tell Ram that, excuse me, thank you. Tell Dasarath, I need one of those earpieces. Somebody narrating the story. Tell Dasarath that it is not Ram to be installed, but it is my son Bharata. And secondly, tell Ram that he has to go to the forest. This was the ultimate kind of punishment for royalty, is to send them off to the forest where they'd be not seen by anyone, what to speak of the hardship of just living in the forest after growing up in a palace. And Dasarath was incredulous at hearing this. Oh, sure. Plenty of room. Just move forward. You can even take this out if you want. We could fit at least 10 people right here. Here, if there's any space in front of you, just move forward. No, even closer. Yeah, you want to move this? Take this out. I don't really need it. Here, right this way. This can go. Everything must go. Thank you, everyone, for joining us from various parts of Silicon Valley. Please come in, make yourselves as comfortable as possible. Just think of it as Kumbh Mela, and you'll feel fine. Amazingly, with this change of heart, Kaikeyi then took up this dastardly plan to tell her husband that she wanted to call in the boons, and when her husband came back home, she was nowhere to be found. Apparently in royal palaces, they have a room for everything. And in the palace, there was a sulking room for the queen. And when he came back to Dasarath, after doing his duties, getting ready for the coronation of his son the next day as the king regent, then he couldn't find his wife. And he looked everywhere. When he asked around to the attendants within the palace, they said, she's in there. And that surprised him because that was not a place where she spent a lot of time, the sulking room. And when he went in, she was dramatically collapsed on the ground and sobbing, whimpering, and so forth. And of course, this is the ultimate weapon. He could not tolerate it and walked into a trap in the sense that he said, oh, I feel so bad. Why are you suffering like this? What happened? Was it something I said? And he extended himself over and over again until he uttered those words, you just tell me, I'll do anything. You just, to get you to stop feeling like this. And then she arose from her slumped position and with great determination in her voice, she said, I am calling in the favors, the boons that you offered me so many years ago, and they are as follows. And she told him the conditions. And at first, he thought that she must be joking. And when he realized, have you ever had that happen? Someone tells you something, you think it's a joke, and they say, no, it's not a joke. And when it actually settles into your heart, there's a visceral experience you might have that there's been a reversal of fortune. This is the very definition of a reversal of fortune. And he felt it throughout his whole body when he did realize that she was being straightforward and asking for this. He fainted. Oftentimes we find that when something becomes something so horrendous happens in our life that our mental system can't handle it. It's beyond what we could imagine living through, then the brain just turns off. Dasarath was in that state. He would come to consciousness. You know how sometimes something happens and you go to sleep and you sleep on it and then you wake up and you think, was it a dream? It's like, no, it wasn't a dream. This is actually happening. He was living in that nightmare of his wife calling for this. Because imagine, now he would have to tell his most beloved son that not only wasn't he going to be anointed as the king, but he would also be banished to the forest for 14 years, for no apparent reason, no fault of his own. Again and again he begged his wife, and when he realized her resoluteness to maintain this, he became morose. And Kaikeyi demanded that it be done immediately, because the next day was the coronation. She made arrangements for Ram to be called to the presence of his father, and soon he came, innocently approaching, and Kaikeyi told him that your father has something important to tell you, but he doesn't have the courage to tell you. She was demeaning him even as she was introducing the subject to Ram, calling him a coward and so forth. As he finally uttered the words to his beloved son, it was the most painful of all utterances he had ever made. His son Ram simply accepted. He only asked, in fact, just backtracking in one or two sentences, Kaikeyi had mentioned the conditions that he would be replaced by Bharata and that Ram himself would go to the forest. And the only disturbance he had in his mind is, that is Ram, why didn't my father tell me directly? Why did Kaikeyi tell me? But there was no sense that he would not follow the order. When something's taken from us, oftentimes we feel like, why did I deserve this? Or I feel assaulted. But Ram didn't feel like that. When he received the order from his father, he took it upon his head and immediately began moving towards his exile, which included going to tell his biological mother what the circumstances were. We won't go into the drama of that scene. And then he went to tell his wife Sita. and telling your wife that you're leaving for the forest for 14 years suddenly is a traumatic telling in and of itself. And when he did, she insisted that I'm coming with you. Of course, there was an argument there, but she prevailed. And same with Lakshman. He said, I'm going with you to the forest. We'll all go together. And that's what happened. They left, and the next day the people of Ayodhya followed their procession as they were leaving the city, so much so that Ram had to insist that they all would go back. But how could they? They were completely attached to Ram. And as he made it to the edge of the city, everyone just stayed there for the night. Everyone from the whole city. They just camped out. We'll just go with you to the forest. And Ram knew that wasn't right. So he had to steal away in the middle of the night, cross the Sarayu River, and head off into the wilderness to leave the citizens behind. And of course, as the Ramayan describes, the grief of the citizens in separation from Ram was profound and heartbreaking to hear. In the story, and there's, of course, many more chapters to tell, and many more details even in the sections I just talked about. Starting from him leaving his citizens, he had to cross a river, and the boatman who took him across with great reverence and devotion, knowing that he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his revered master. And Ramachandra then asked Sita, near the end of the boat ride, please give me your ring. I'll give it to him in payment for taking us across the river. And as he offered it to the boatman said, no, I can't accept it. He said, as is the case in a Vedic culture, if you're in the same profession as someone else, you never ask for compensation. If you cut hair and you go to another barber for a haircut, then they don't charge you. Doctor doesn't charge a doctor and so forth. So he invoked that reason and he said, we're in the same profession. I can't accept it. And Ram said, what parallel do you make between a prince and a boatman? And the boatman replied that just as I've taken you safely across this river, when I come to the point when I leave this mortal frame, I will call upon you, my Lord, please ply me safely across the ocean of birth and death of this material world. In that way, we're in the same profession. Throughout the Ramayan, there are such moving exchanges between Lord Ram and his devotees. Some may not look like devotees, but they turn out to be devotees and so forth. And there are many lessons to take away. If we keep going backwards and we come to the story of Kaikeyi, I'm always struck with, and in fact I coined the phrase, the mantra effect. Because when somebody has envy in their hearts and then they speak it into your ear, we can become infected, affected and infected. And therefore, when the Vedas, when the Bhagavatam, when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was teaching all about the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, was asked, what is the important quality of a person who's trying to advance in devotional service? And he said, Atsasangatyag e Vaishnavachar. He said they should be very careful not to associate with people who are envious of God. Because as they speak into your ears, that you'll take on those qualities. In fact, it's one of the main principles that Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita. For instance, in the 13th chapter, 22nd verse, he says, Purusha prakritisto hi bhunte prakriti jan gunan, karanam gunasangosya sadasad yoni janmasu. And that is that, look at the way you are now. If you just observe yourself, Sometimes we don't take time to observe ourselves. We very infrequently, at least speaking for myself, take inventory, partly because I don't want to face it. But if we do take inventory and see what is my nature, what are my foibles, what are my habits that I'm engaged in and so forth, I may say, how did I get like this? Well, Krishna answers in the Bhagavad Gita, Karanam guna sangosya. You got like you are now, weird way to say it, I'll speak English from now on, by your association, your previous associations, your sangha. Those you opened your heart to, those you decided to live with and take time to joke with, to eat with, and so forth, their qualities have shaped you. It's because of your association. By the same token, for those who are eager to advance spiritually, as mentioned, satam prasangam mamavirya sambido bhavanti hrit karna rasayana kata taj joshanad ashwa pavargavartmani shradar atir bhaktir anukramishati. By associating with those who are sincere, truthful, and sincere about dedicating their lives to God, then that association will take us on an entirely different trajectory back to the spiritual world. So the mantra effect is a lesson from this story to be careful of those who would dissuade us from our sincere endeavor to make advancement in spiritual life. Another lesson, and one that has been spoken about by devotees for many centuries, is the way in which Ramachandra took the words of his father. In fact, it's memorialized in a verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam 11th canto, which describes Ramachandra. Not only Ramachandra, it also describes Lord Chaitanya and Lord Krishna in one verse. Same verse, three different interpretations. Tattva-darśinah sarepshicha raja lakshman dharmishta arya vachasa yadagararanyam mayam ragam dayite yipsitam anvadavad vande mahapurushate charanadavindam. This verse, in relationship to Lord Ramachandra, describes how he left behind the goddess of fortune, because in the end of the story, which I won't go into right now, he and Sita, his eternal consort, are separated. He chooses his kingly dharma when separating himself from Sita, who goes to the forest to live with Valmiki, has twins from Ramachandra who are then raised by Valmiki. She enters back into the earth. And I said I wouldn't go into it, but I kind of did. And the verse says that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although he has unlimited opulence himself, one of his opulences is renunciation, which means that he has the power, unlike most living beings, to detach himself even from the goddess of fortune. Everybody else wants the goddess of fortune to come live in their house. Right? Only a few of you admit it, right? I bet if I go to your house, I'll find a little placard of Lakshmi Devi somewhere. Maybe even in your pocket here. So the second line says that Dharmishta Arya Vachasa Yadagad Aranyam. Aranya means the forest. And why did he go to the forest? Because of Arya Vachasa. Arya Vachasa means because of the authoritative words of his father. It was his dharma. His father said it. His father owed a debt. And he said, you have to go to the forest. So Ramachandra said, then that's what I'm going to do. And he just left. And in fact, all the leaders of Ayodhya then came back to the forest to find Ram, to convince him. They brought many of the pundits, the priests, everyone to come. They all had their own way of trying to convince Ram, you should come back. We could nullify this contract, no problem. But Ram wouldn't do it. He wouldn't budge. And this is a great lesson because most people, they'll try to wiggle out of something. It's like, well, they didn't really mean it. Besides, they're not here anymore. And so many ways in which I may do what's convenient. But that was not Ramachandra. He took Dharma and he took the words of his father, who is his spiritual leader, Arya Vajasa, as his directive in life. And so one of the teachings that comes down to us from Kṛṣṇa, tadvidhi praṇipātena paripraśnena sevayā upadekṣyanti te jñānaṁ jñāninas tattva-darśinah. If you want to find the path forward in spiritual life, then you must find a representative, one who's following the process of Krishna consciousness, of spiritual life, who emulates the teachings of the scripture and also speaks authoritatively, and then attach yourself to the instruction. And for better or for worse, in fact, the world moves in strange ways we cannot predict. We can't hold on to our so-called good fortune in this world. There will be reversals of fortune. But Krishna recommends that as we're living in the world, that we buoy ourselves by taking the order of the Supreme, and especially as it's passed down through the representatives of the Supreme and coming to us. And if we hold on to that, that's the rope that will take us through the turbulent waters of the material world. Mātrā-sparśās kaunteya, śītoṣṇa-sukha-duḥkha-dāḥ, āgamāpāyino nityās, tāṁs titikṣasva bhārata. We can be tolerant because we'll know, although I'm being subjected to many changes in this world, I have one pointed attention on what I'm supposed to do in all circumstances. And if I try to adjust all the circumstances in my life, then I'll never come to the end of it. So one can take the order of Krishna, coming down through what we call disciplic succession, and hold on to that in all circumstances in one's life. This is one of the greatest lessons of the Ramayan, following the footsteps of Lord Ramacandra. Some may say, well, is there a God? Where is this so-called supreme? Amazingly, after thousands of years, people are dancing in the street when they hear the pastimes of Ram, what to speak of establishing a new temple of Ramachandra, and they're moved from within their hearts. I don't know many other people historically who have that effect on people. Do you? We may mention other personalities of the world, politicians, for instance, who were here today, gone tomorrow, and maybe discovered later on to have been not as moral as we thought. There may be great musicians, poets, and so forth, and they all give us there is a twinge within our heart when we hear of them. But the way that people are moved when they hear about Ramachandra, his pastimes, and his presence in the world, is a reflection of the power of the Supreme Personality of Godhead to attract us, to move us. And it's that power that Krishna recommends in the Bhagavad Gita that we should embrace, that we should learn. First of all, we're not blind followers, but we should learn the science of God and understand. As Krishna mentions, he starts with the ABCs in the Bhagavad Gita. He mentions that Bhumirapo analuvavayu kammano bhudirevacha ahankara ityame bina prakritirashtata. The material world is lower energy, made of earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. Then he says, but besides this, there's the superior energy of the soul. And then he goes on to talk about how besides just the soul, there's more than just us within this body. There's also the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in many verses he describes Ishvara sarvabhutanam hridaya sharajona tishtiti brahmayan sarvabhutani yantra rudrani maya. And God's there with us in the heart, guiding us as our well-wisher, the suhrit. And then the science, it goes just as we might start in second grade. Isn't what you start with? 2 + 2 is 4. Nowadays you probably start in preschool and calculus by the time you're in kindergarten. Is that the way it works? at least from in my generation. Probably started a little later. But in the science of God, there are gradations. As we start from the 2 plus 2, you're not your body. We're not part of this world. God's our best well-wisher. He's there within the heart. Then there's the idea that we actually have a relationship with the Supreme, but what is it? And how do we develop it? We develop it in the association of the devotees and by hearing, shravanam, kirtanam, and so forth. And then, as is described by the great teachers of Bhakti Yoga, there are stages that we'll reach by practicing devotional service. Adau shada tata sarasangata bhajana kriya, tato narta nivriti sat tato nishta ruchistata, etc. These describe how in the beginning there'll be an awakening of shraddha or faith. That's a sense that, wow, this seems like a good idea. I never thought about that before, but now it does seem like a good idea. And then from that, there's an eagerness to associate with like-minded people who are spiritual. That's called sadhu sangha. And from sadhu sangha comes bhajana kriya, when you say, okay, that's it. These guys are doing it, I'm doing it too. It's like, count me in. I'm going to follow this. And then after that, you have to swim across an ocean. It's called a nartandavritti, which means you have to come in contact with all your bad habits and all the disinclinations you've developed for practicing devotional service from bad association over many lifetimes. And then you may come to rest on the little island called Nishta, where you actually find bedrock in your practice of devotional service. And from there, ruchi, or real taste for devotional service, arises, and so forth. So when we have these days, the days when we can remember Ramachandra and his pastimes and celebrate the fact that he comes to this world and he gives us an opportunity to think of him, to sing songs about him and remember his names and so forth. What to speak of, go visit his temples, or if we're not in the vicinity of a temple, then we can create a temple in our homes and so forth. Then we can feel in any circumstance in this material world connected with him. So one of the main ways to do this is by the process, as I mentioned at the outset, of what's called Sankirtan, or the group singing of the names of God. And fortunately, in the mantra that we sing here at our ISKCON of Silicon Valley, the Maha Mantra, some of you may have heard it, it goes like this: Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So you may say, well, I'm a devotee of Lord Ram. So there you have it. Hare Rama. I like Krishna better. Something for you. I like Srimati Radharani. Okay, Hare is there. So everything's there complete within the Maha Mantra. And even on Ramachandra's appearance day, the main mantra that our Acharya, the leader of our organization, would ask us to sing is the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So since it's a day of celebration for the Ram Mandir Pran Pratishta, would you all like to sing the Maha Mantra together? Yes. That does it. We're going to do it. Now we're going to do an exercise in group organization, as never seen before, because we're all from Silicon Valley and we can do stuff here. So we're going to pick up all the asanas and move them back neatly under that poster of the monthly Sankirtan Festival. We're going to roll up this rug faster than you've ever seen it rolled up before. Move all the microphones. We'll reassemble on the dance floor. And ladies on this side, men on that side. And then we're going to have a Hare Krishna dance party. Are you ready? Only a few of you are ready, I can see that. All right, let's go.